So on January 1st, 1914, the first commercial flight was ready to take off. And like a crowd, they gathered to watch because they knew like they were going to be witnessing history. So the whole flight, it took only about 23 minutes from liftoff to landing. And it traveled about 18 miles going from St. Petersburg to Tampa. Now, at the time, the only other way to get from St. Petersburg to Tampa was by train because it was separated by water. Now, the train ride, if you wanted to do that, it would take about 11 hours. So it wasn't ideal. 11 hours to 23 minutes? I mean, what are we, time traveling? What is this? It's just people's brains were exploding. They just, what? Now, with the airboat, it took less than half an hour. So people were like, whoa, this is a miracle. So this first flight was a success. And after this, the plane gets on a schedule and it would take off like 4 times a day, and it would cost any future passengers around $5, which in today's money would be like $160. I know, at first I was like, well, wow, that's not that bad. But this was actually like 1/4 of the average person's monthly salary. So at the time, so like if you really wanted to get on a plane, like it was a financial sacrifice. With the success of these short commercial plane trips, the airline industry was looking to expand. But then in July 1914, World War I broke out. Now, all of the country's plane manufacturers focused their attention on helping out the military. I mean, nobody wanted war, but it turned out to be a pretty good thing for planes, because now like there was funding for the airline industry because engineers had to learn how to build like the best possible airplane for the government. And one of the people learning to build planes was a man named William, aka Bill, Boeing. Yeah, that Boeing. Yeah. So Bill was born in 1881, and he was the first of 8 children. Now his father was, I guess, very wealthy, and he had his own logging and mining business. But when Bill was only 9 years old, his dad had died from the flu, which was like sadly really common back then in the 1800s. So Bill, he had to grow up pretty fast and help his mom raise his siblings. So Bill started college at the turn of the century, but he ended up not finishing. He left school to take up the family logging business. Now, after doing that for a few years, he's feeling kind of aimless, Like he hasn't found his thing yet, his passion, my purpose. And then in 1909, his life totally changed. Bill randomly decides to go to a convention in Seattle. Now, at the convention, there was an airplane demonstration. And Bill's like, yeah, I'll watch. But as soon as he heard the plane's propellers and watched the machine float up into the sky like freaking magic, his mind was just blown. Now, he couldn't get this plane demonstration out of his head. So he goes to another convention in Los Angeles. But this time, it was mainly focused on airplanes. Allegedly, he goes around and he's asking every pilot that he meets if he can have a ride in their airplane. He's saying, please. And everyone says no. They're like, no. So at first, Bill is bummed. But then he has a light bulb moment. And he's like, wait a second. I'm rich. I don't need you. Whatever. He realizes, he doesn't need anyone to help him learn how to fly. He's like, I'm just going to do it myself. And most importantly, he was like, he found his passion or whatever. So he's like, I'm going to make a name for myself in this airline industry. He found his calling. Now, Bill, in his mind, he's like, I'm going to make the best planes you've ever seen. So he uses the family money to start doing just that. He starts taking flying lessons. He buys planes from other companies and takes them apart to learn how they work. He tinkers. He's a tinkerer. Now, this is all happening when Bill is around 35. At this time, his airplane project, it couldn't just be a fun hobby, unfortunately. He needed to work for the government and help out with the war. Expected of him. So Bill gets some government contracts and he starts his company, the Pacific Aero Product. But eventually he decides like, that name doesn't really slap. I should change it. So in 1917, Bell renamed the business Boeing Airplane Company. Snaps. I mean, pretty iconic, right? I don't think he was wrong. I mean, I think that's a way better name. After the war ended, the government didn't really need all these planes anymore. And like airplanes for everyday passengers were still, it was very rare. Like you weren't really doing that. So the government started to sell off the planes that they were no longer using. But other than that, this kind of seems like the end for the plane. There was no need for them. But by the mid-1920s, the boys in blue pulled through. And no, I don't mean the police. I mean the mail carriers. Yeah. So the government decided to start using airplanes to ship mail cross country. Now, technically this began in 1918, but it wasn't until later that this started to become more common. It had cost about 65 cents to send mail by airplane, which would be about $15 today. But look, this literally saves air travel. So now all these companies start repairing old planes and building better ones to send everyone their letters and their packages. And even though the planes were improving, it was still considered pretty dangerous. Now, especially when it came to navigating. Imagine, close your eyes, go on this journey. You're flying an airplane. How do you know where you are? I don't know. Where am I? I don't know. How did they know? I don't know. Most pilots, they would have to navigate using landmarks that they could see from the sky. Yeah, I don't know. Or they would use paper maps. And I was going to try and describe to you what these paper maps look like, but it's really hard to explain what they look like because I know you're imagining just a normal paper map, but this was it was on a scroll. It was a whole situation. It just wasn't ideal, but it's what they had. Now, for a long time, there was not really a way for the pilot to figure out exactly where they were. So it was kind of good luck. Good luck out there. Just look out for the Circle K, make a left at the Walmart, and then you should see a blue house, and I think you're there. That's how you got around, you know? In the late 1920s, some of these planes started to carry passengers instead of just mail. And at this time, it was only for the rich. So now it was the average plane ticket would cost around $260. And if you want a little conversion in today's money, that would be about $5,000. That's a lot, right? Which at the time was half the cost of buying a brand new car. Could you imagine getting a brand new car for $10,000? Wow. Anywho, but okay, so great. They could do it if they wanted to, but the experience was actually pretty uncomfortable. The planes at the time were not pressurized, meaning that they were not sealed against the outside air. And this meant that whatever the weather was outside, that's what the inside of the plane felt like. So most of the time, because you're thousands of feet in the air, it's cold. It's colder than a witch's titty, which rumor has it that's pretty cold. But passengers, if you're gonna fly, you'd have to wear tons of layers of clothing to keep warm during the flight. So guys would wear full-on wool suits and women would wear their fur coats. And yeah, it was inconvenient, but it was also a bit of a brag because you're getting to show off all their expensive clothes. The women are might as well wear the pearls if I'm gonna be wearing the mink. So also at the time, windows not fully sealed. This was a good thing because it allowed oxygen to come in so you wouldn't die. So it was kind of necessary. But it also meant that the planes couldn't go as high in the air because the higher up you fly, the thinner the air is and the less you can breathe. And I guess when you're not high up, things can get bumpy. Okay, you think you experience turbulence now? Back then, you're running into any storms and wind and all sorts of weather, because you're flying through it, not above it. If you don't like flying, this is the absolute nightmare. Now, on top of all that, the plane itself didn't even hold that much fuel yet. So oftentimes they would have to stop to refuel before making it to their final destination. So at this point, Air travel is just rich people paying to sit inside a tube made of wood and metal. No AC, no heating, no oxygen flow. It's just a scary, bumpy ride with lots of stops. It was freaky and dangerous, and honestly, again, it seemed like this whole flying thing was just going to be like a passing fad. It wasn't going to really be a thing. But then, in 1930, a woman named Ellen Church would change the airline industry forever.